They barely looked at me before shaking their head. "Sorry, sir, there's no reservation under your name." I blinked, thrown for a moment. That couldn't be right. My wife's family invited me to her father's retirement dinner. They had to be here already. The maitre d' offered a courteous but cold smile. "There's a reservation for 8 under Evelyn Kingsley, but I'm afraid your name isn't listed." I didn't even have time to reply before a sharp, far too familiar voice sliced through the air behind me. "Oh, Noah," Evelyn's voice cooed, sugar-laced and cruel. "You showed up?" I turned, and there she stood, all sharp pearls and sharper smiles. My mother-in-law, immaculately dressed in a slate-gray designer gown that probably cost more than my entire month's salary, regarded me like a stain on her carpet. My wife, Eliza, sat stiffly behind her, flanked by her 2 brothers, each grinning like jackals in tailored suits. I straightened my back, trying to keep my composure. I thought this was a family dinner. Evelyn's grin spread wider. "Oh, honey, it is." Her voice dropped, just loud enough for the lobby to hear. "But you're more like a seasonal hire." A quiet gasp echoed from a nearby table. The maitre d' looked horrified, unsure whether to step in or stay out. And me? My stomach churned, but I didn't flinch. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "You're not one of us, Noah," Evelyn continued, adjusting the diamond pin on her collar. "And this place," she waved an elegant hand toward the glittering chandeliers and marble floors, "isn't exactly in your league. Maybe a sports bar would be more appropriate." Eliza said nothing. Her silence screamed louder than Evelyn's insults. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an oversight. This was a public execution disguised as a family dinner. I was never meant to have a seat at that table. I was the punchline. The stray. The outsider. They could humiliate and walk past like I'd never mattered. But they didn't know I hadn't come alone. And in a few minutes, Evelyn Kingsley would learn that you never humiliate a man who knows exactly where his power lies. This wasn't just some offhand snub or social mishap. This moment, this setup, was the final, sharpened blade in a long series of carefully hidden cuts. As I stood in the glittering lobby of the Bellagio Grand, surrounded by cold stares and whispers, the past few years unfolded in my mind like a bitter slideshow I hadn't asked to watch. Evelyn Kingsley, my mother-in-law, had been playing this game since day one, and I had been blind to the rules. When Eliza and I first got engaged, I thought the tension with her mother was just garden-variety disapproval. I wasn't born into money, hadn't been groomed at elite prep schools, and didn't come from a bloodline that summered in the Hamptons. I was just Noah Ward 38, first-generation college graduate, a software systems guy who built everything I had with my own hands. But Evelyn, she made it clear that none of that mattered. Not to her. It began with subtle things. The sideways compliments. The wrong-sized suits were gifted accidentally. The way she'd book reservations for family events, then forget to include me. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself she'd warm up eventually. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But the real dagger came when I realized Eliza never stood up for me. Not once. Every exclusion was followed by silence. Every slight was greeted with a shrug. And still, I stayed. I kept showing up. I kept thinking that effort would earn me acceptance. I wanted to believe love was enough I'd eventually earn a seat at the Kingsley table. But tonight destroyed that illusion. Evelyn hadn't just excluded me. She'd orchestrated a scene. She chose the most exclusive restaurant in the city, stacked it with witnesses, and then cut me out like dead weight. This was theater, and I was cast as the joke. But as I stood there, heart pounding, fists clenched, something in me snapped. Not with rage, but with clarity. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't some charity case they could toss aside. I had my history, my legacy. One Evelyn Kingsley didn't know the first thing about. And I was done asking for a seat at her table. Now, I was building my own. Evelyn was still smiling, relishing the quiet humiliation unfolding in the center of the grand dining hall. My name hadn't been on the reservation list, and from the look in her eyes, that had been the point. She wanted the staff to escort me out. She wanted the other diners draped in couture and pearls to witness my rejection like a public flogging in a velvet-wrapped theater. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned to the maitre d', my voice steady, sharp as glass. "Would you mind asking the general manager to come out? Tell him Noah Ward is here." Evelyn let out a short, mocking laugh that echoed across the marble floor. "Oh, darling," she sneered. "This is the Marcellus room. You don't ask to speak to management here. You wait 3 months for a table if they even know your name. I met her gaze evenly. He knows my name. She smirked again, but I caught that split-second flicker of doubt. It was faint, but it was there. And then, right on Quay, a voice broke through the tension. Noah? Heads turned. Stepping out from a frosted glass doorway was a tall man in his early 50s, wearing a midnight blue suit that looked cut from a different tax bracket. He moved with quiet command, the presence you feel before you see. Derek Marcellus, I greeted, a slow smile spreading across my face. Been a while. Derek crossed the room in a few strides and offered his hand. Too long, brother. What brings you here tonight? I gestured toward the table where Evelyn sat frozen, her fork midair. I wasn't on the guest list, I said lightly. Bit of an oversight. Derek's eyes narrowed slightly, reading the room in an instant. Then, with a smooth pivot, he turned to the maitre d'. Get Mr. Ward a table wherever he wants. He doesn't wait here. Evelyn's jaw clenched. Wait a second. You know each other? Know each other? Derek said, glancing at her like she had insulted his wine list. Noah trained under me, back when this place was nothing more than an idea sketched on napkins. He helped me launch the original Marcellus concept in Seattle. The table fell into a stunned silence. And tonight, Derek added, we treat him like the cornerstone he is. It was at that moment that the air shifted. I wasn't just back at the table, I was at the table. You could feel the air in the room shift subtle but seismic. Evelyn's carefully curated smirk began to stiffen. The sons she once paraded like pedigree showpieces were now shrinking in their seats, while Elizabeth's wife looked like she wanted to disappear into the stem of her wine glass. Derek hadn't just vouched for me. He had reintroduced me to the room not as an outsider, but as someone instrumental to what this restaurant even was, and that changed everything. The maitre d' returned moments later, breathless, and bowed slightly. Mr. Ward, a table is being prepared in the center lounge, next to the wine wall. I didn't need to look at Evelyn to know her expression had cracked. I could feel her unraveling. I turned toward Derek. Mind if I join their table instead? I said it loud enough for nearby patrons to hear, casually pointing toward the long, candlelit Kingsley spread. A pause, and then Derek gave a slow, deliberate nod. Of course, you belong wherever you sit. The maitre d' made the arrangements without hesitation, clearing space beside Eliza while servers silently reset the place settings. I walked forward, not rushed, not smudges certain. And I took my seat, unfolding my napkin with precision, feeling the weight of the room tilt in my favor. Evelyn tried to recover. She laughed too sharp, too loud, and lifted her glass. Well, she said, her tone honeyed but trembling beneath the surface. I suppose you've always been good at networking. Networking? I repeated, arching a brow. Is that what we're calling 10 years of mentorship and operations development now? Her lips tightened. Eliza, meanwhile, shifted in her chair. She hadn't spoken a word. You have to admit, Evelyn said, it's unusual. For someone in your position to know someone like Derek Marcellus so intimately. I leaned back, studying her. Unusual, maybe, but not impossible. That's the thing about people like you, Evelyn. You confuse exclusivity with superiority. You think they couldn't possibly build something bigger than it just because someone didn't come from money. She blinked. The silence at the table was stifling. Even the waitstaff had paused, lingering near the edges like witnesses to a fire that no one dared extinguish. I continued, voice low and controlled. I didn't marry into wealth. I didn't inherit connections. Everything I've achieved, I earned. And now, here we are, eating the same food, drinking the same wine, at the same table. I raised my glass, holding her gaze. The only difference is, I didn't need a last name to sit here. That landed like thunder. Her sons had gone pale. Eliza had finally looked at me, eyes searching. But I couldn't tell if it was recognition or regret. And Evelyn? For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. The small that comes from realizing the ground beneath you is crumbling and no one's coming to hold you up. But I wasn't finished. You know what's funny? I asked, tilting my head. You've spent years treating me like I was beneath you. Like I was just some charity case you tolerated because your daughter insisted. But the truth is, Evelyn, without me, none of you would be sitting this pretty. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off with a slow smile. You see those real estate ventures your family brags about? What tech integrations got your husband's firm off the ground? That wasn't luck. That was my capital, my analytics, my strategy. Your legacy is built on the foundation I created while you were busy pretending I was invisible. And that's when I saw it, the crack in her armor. Not rage, not indignation. It was fear. Because for the first time, Evelyn Kingsley understood. I wasn't trying to belong to her world. I had already surpassed it. Evelyn's silence didn't last long. It never did. She was a woman who had mastered the art of regaining control until now. She picked up her glass again, the stem trembling slightly between her fingers, and gave a hollow laugh. "Well, Noah," she said, her voice laced with venom disguised as grace. "For someone who prides himself on being self-made, you certainly seem to enjoy the perks of this family's lifestyle." There it was. The dig she had been dying to deliver a final swing dressed in silk. I didn't blink. "What exactly are you implying?" I asked, my voice low, steady, too calm for her comfort. "Oh, don't play coy," she said, leaning in. "I mean, it's no secret, dear. You live in a penthouse that my daughter had before you. You drive the car her father leased. You benefit from a last name that, quite frankly, never belonged to you." I let her finish. I let every word hang like smoke from a slow-burning fire. Then, I set down my glass softly and leaned forward. "No, Evelyn," I said. "What's not a secret is how much you resent the idea that I never needed your wealth to succeed." Her smile faded just a fraction. "You see, while crafting an illusion of prestige, I was building something real while you were busy. Something sustainable. Something that, ironically, your family is now financially entangled in." Across the table, Eliza shifted uncomfortably. Her brothers stared at their plates like they could crawl under the linen. But Evelyn still clung to her narrative like a crown slipping from her head. She scoffed. "Entangled? Don't flatter yourself. My daughter was being generous." I cut her off, calm but sharp. Generosity implies a one-way transaction. Eliza and I had a partnership, that's what I believed. But those joint ventures? Do you think she brought those luxury assets into the marriage? I matched every dollar, sometimes more. I could see the disbelief start to crack through her composure. "In fact," I continued, "half of your husband's latest real estate expansions were made possible through my predictive modeling, the firm he runs so proudly. It uses my proprietary algorithm to analyze land value trends. And guess what, Evelyn?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. "It's licensed under my name," I said, "and my terms." The silence that followed was deafening. No one breathed. Even the background clatter of plates seemed to pause. I leaned back, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "You wanted to humiliate me tonight. You orchestrated this little dinner with the hope I'd shrink. Walk away. Prove you right." Evelyn looked away, her mask beginning to crack. "But what you failed to realize," I said, voice firm but unshaken, "is that I didn't marry into this family to belong to it. I married Eliza because I loved her, because I thought love was enough." I turned to my wife, who finally looked me in the eye. "But when love is silent in the face of humiliation," I said, "when it lets disrespect fester for peace, it stops being love, and it starts being fear." Eliza opened her mouth. No words came out. Evelyn bristled. "You're twisting everything." "No," I said, standing now, my voice rising just enough to fill the space. "I'm untwisting it. I'm laying it out plain for everyone who's watched you smile through your teeth and pretend you built a dynasty when in reality, you've built nothing but expectations on top of other people's sacrifices." I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair and buttoned it slowly. "I've given this family more than it ever gave me, and yet I've been treated like a tolerated outsider, like some footnote to your legacy." Evelyn's mouth opened again, but I didn't let her speak. "I'm not just leaving the table tonight. I'm leaving the illusion that I ever needed it in the first place." And as I walked away, I didn't look back. Because what they had offered me was status. But what I had built was power. I didn't go home angry that night. I went home awake, wide-eyed. A stillness had taken over Mione that didn't come from rage but revelation. For years, I had convinced myself that the quiet humiliations didn't matter. Evelyn's cruelty was generational and cultural, something I had to tolerate as the cost of marrying into the Kingsley name. That Eliza's silence wasn't indifference but a form of diplomacy. I told myself she was trying to keep the peace. But that night, watching her sit there, watching me be ambushed like a stranger without so much as reaching for my hand, I realized something brutal. She wasn't trying to keep the peace. She was the peacekeeper, for them. Never for me. When I walked through the door of our penthouse later that night, I didn't feel like I was entering my home. I felt like I was entering a set and expensive illusion where I'd been playing a role too long. And for the first time, I no longer felt obligated to perform. I moved with clarity, not hesitation, straight to the office. She never bothered to lock the safe because she assumed I wouldn't need what was inside. Assumptions. Their family was built on them. Inside the safe were the documents that mattered: the joint LLCs, the venture contracts, and the licensing agreements for the tech that had kept the Kingsley portfolio afloat for the past 5 years. Every one of them bore my name. Every one of them tied their prestige to my contributions. I didn't take the documents. I didn't need to. I just took photos. Clear, dated, time-stamped. Then I packed, not in fury but with precision. Each shirt folded, each suit laid flat. No mess. No drama. When Eliza walked in 40 minutes later, carrying a to-go dessert box from the restaurant like nothing had happened, she froze at the sight of me zipping the final suitcase. Noah, she blinked, confused. What are you doing? I looked at her, looked, and all I could think was, I loved this woman. I trusted this silence. I'm leaving, I said, voice flat. You don't have to pretend to be surprised. She stepped forward. Can we just talk first? Now you want to talk? I let out a short laugh. You had 3 hours at that table to say something, anything, but you chose silence. I didn't want to escalate things, she murmured. Escalate, I repeated, incredulous. Eliza, your mother ambushed me, publicly, in front of your brothers, strangers, and even the staff. That wasn't dinner. That was a public execution, and you let it happen. She folded her arms. You're overreacting. No, I'm just finally reacting. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off with a question I had buried for years. When my name was left off the wedding invites for your extended family, was that your oversight or hers? A pause. Then, does it matter? That told me everything I needed to know. I grabbed my briefcase. I'm filing the separation agreement tomorrow. You'd walk away from this over a dinner? It's not the dinner, Eliza. It's the decade of swallowing my pride so your family could digest their image. And you think leaving fixes that? No, I said, heading toward the door. But staying guarantees I never fix myself. As I reached for the doorknob, her voice sharpened behind me. You think you're taking half of this? I turned slowly. Her expression had shifted, not desperate, not heartbroken, but calculating. That penthouse, Noah? The firm? What car do you drive? All of it was made possible by my family. I smiled, calmly pulling a manila folder from my briefcase and laying it on the console. Then you should read the contracts you signed before handing me that equity. She stared at it like it might bite her. You never transferred ownership, Eliza, I said, voice unwavering. You assumed I would. You assumed I wouldn't care about signatures, that I was just the support act to your family's show. Her lip curled. If you think a few legal tricks are going to scare me, I stepped closer. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm setting you free. Silence. Then I added softly, you don't owe me loyalty, Eliza, but you did owe me the truth. I turned to leave again, and just before I walked out, I said what I needed to. For the record, I didn't marry you for status. I married you despite it. Her face shifted, but I didn't stop. That night I didn't go to a hotel. I went to the loft I had quietly maintained under my name and paid in full. No liens, no family ties, just mine. At sunrise, my lawyer called to confirm the documents had been filed, and I smiled. Not because I was free of Eliza, but because for the first time, I was free of needing to prove anything to people who only saw value in pedigree. That version of me, the one who begged for a seat at their table, he was gone. The man who woke up that morning, he was building his own, and this time, no one could take it from him. I didn't leave in a storm. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no thrown glasses. I went with quiet precision, the kind that unnerves people more than rage ever could. Because when a man stops arguing, that's when he's already decided. By the time the sun was up the next morning, I was at my lawyer's office sharp suit, clean shave, coffee in hand, and my mind clearer than it had been in years. Olivia Marston had been on retainer with me for nearly 2 years, ever since I first started noticing the cracks in the foundation of my marriage. Not the emotional cracks, those came later, but the financial ones. The subtle discrepancies in ownership titles, the blurred lines between my contributions and what the Kingsleys conveniently called joint assets. I want to initiate the divorce, I told her, voice calm but unwavering. And I want full control over the properties tied to my capital. Olivia didn't flinch. She just nodded, already opening a folder. You kept the originals of the founding contracts? I slid a flash drive across her desk, scanned and time-stamped, along with the venture deeds, the equity sheets, and the licensing agreements. Everything. Perfect, she said with a faint smile. Then this won't take long. And it didn't. The official filing was submitted to the county clerk's office that afternoon. Within the hour, Eliza was served the preliminary notice delivered straight to the Kingsley estate, where I knew she'd run to lick her wounds and consult her mother. I imagined Evelyn sitting at the marble kitchen island, her fingers wrapped around a third glass of wine before noon, Eliza pacing beside her, swearing this was all just a bluff. They never expected I'd pull the trigger. Not because they thought I loved too much, but because they assumed I lacked the spine to walk away from everything they dangled, like gold-plated carrots. But what they didn't understand was that I never married for money. I got married for love. And once love left the building, so did I. A week passed, and the backlash began. Adam Kingsley, Eliza's father, called me personally. A man who hadn't said more than 4 words to me at any family event now suddenly wanted to have a chat. "Let's not blow this out of proportion, Noah," he said over the phone. "It's a rough patch. Happens to all marriages." "No," I replied coldly. "What happened to this marriage is a system of disrespect, orchestrated by your wife and enabled by your daughter." He paused, clearly unused to being spoken to that directly. "You want to fight over what? A few business ties? A condo? A last name?" "No," I said. "I'm not fighting at all. I'm just taking back what I built." Then I hung up. 2 days later, I received a cease and desist from one of their lawyers, challenging the intellectual property rights to my software platform, the one their real estate algorithm had been using for years to assess urban development zones. Unfortunately for them, that software was copyrighted under my LLC. I registered 2 years before Eliza even introduced me to her parents. I forwarded the letter to Olivia, who responded with one of the most elegantly brutal emails I've ever seen, attaching legal proof that not only did I own the program, but that the Kingsley firm had violated licensing terms by distributing it through secondary partners. That little mistake? It opened the door to a 7-figure damages claim. I hadn't planned on playing offense, but I'd bring the whole ledger if they wanted war. That's when everything changed. Suddenly, the Kingsleys wanted to settle. Fast. Privately. Quietly. We met in a private conference suite at a downtown high-rise. Evelyn was there, draped in black like she was attending a funeral, eyes narrowed as if I'd somehow stolen something from her. Eliza sat beside her, arms crossed, looking like she wanted the table to swallow her whole. Adam probably didn't speak because his lawyers told him to avoid it after the licensing threat. I walked in alone. There is no legal team, no briefcase, just confidence. Olivia had already prepped the agreement clean split. I'd retain 100% of my business interests, full ownership of the loft, and legal rights to the pending AI valuation patent I had worked on for nearly 2 years. Eliza's attorney pushed back. He leveraged shared marital funds during early development, the man said. I leaned forward. Really? I pulled out a single sheet of paper. This shows that the seed round came from my account 2 months before we married. Would you like the bank records too? Silence. Evelyn stood up, voice tight. You're a fraud, Noah. A manipulative snake. You used my daughter. I stood calmly. No, Evelyn. I loved your daughter. I supported her. I gave everything I had for 10 years, and in return I was ignored, dismissed, and publicly ridiculed. But what I never did was use her. The only thing I used was my brain. And unfortunately for you, it was sharper than your entire dinner table combined. Eliza didn't speak. Her hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, out of realization. She had never thought I'd follow through. But I had, and it was done. 2 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. No appeals, no drama. I moved into my loft full-time, upgraded the workspace, and launched the new version of the predictive valuation platform. 3 major firms picked it up in the first month alone. Licensing deals rolled in. Speaking invitations followed. And just like that, the man who once had to prove his worth at a table full of sneers became the one writing checks that decided other people's futures. The best part? I didn't gloat. I didn't go back. And when Eliza sent a messages hesitant, months later asking if we could grab a coffee just to talk, I didn't reply. Because some people don't deserve closure. They deserve distance. And Evelyn? She faded into irrelevance once her family's brand stopped being propped up by my ideas. Their reputation crumbled under the weight of its vanity. And me? I stopped asking for space. I started owning it. It didn't hit me all at once. The feeling of being free, of no longer carrying the silent burden of someone else's expectations. It came gradually in the way. The mornings felt quieter, the air sharper, and my thoughts no longer clouded by unspoken battles. There was no more need to rehearse conversations in my head. No more tiptoeing around someone else's pride. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood on the rooftop of my downtown loft, the city humming beneath me like a living reminder of what I'd built. A glass of aged bourbon rested in my hand, untouched. The skyline looked different now, less like a fortress and more like an open map. I had stopped checking social media. I didn't care about the Kingsley's image anymore. If Evelyn wanted to post edited family portraits with carefully angled captions pretending everything was thriving, she could. Let her cling to fiction. I was finally living in reality. The new version of my software had just signed a licensing agreement with a leading architecture analytics firm in Chicago. It was my third major deal in 6 weeks. I'd hired 2 former colleagues to help scale the operation. And for the first time, I wasn't just the guy with the vision, I was running the empire. Some nights, I'd still think of Eliza, not with longing, but with clarity. It was strange how someone could love you quietly and never choose you loudly. She had always played neutral and always deferred to her mother, and in the end, that silence did more damage than any words could. Then came the message. A short, careful line in my inbox. "Hey, I know a lot has changed. Just wondering if we could grab a coffee, no pressure." I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but I finally didn't feel the need to say anything. There was no anger, no desire for revenge, just the peace from surviving a storm and realizing you were the anchor. I deleted the message without replying. Some things I had learned don't deserve a reopening. They deserve closure on your terms. Later that week, I walked into the auditorium of a business summit where I'd been invited to speak. The theme? Redefining value in leadership. I stepped onto that stage not as someone who had been invited out of pity, but as someone they needed to hear from. And when I shared my story not with bitterness, but with precision, the room didn't just listen. They leaned in. I told them about the years I spent trying to belong to a family that measured worth by legacy instead of character. I gave too much silence to people who never gave me a voice. And I finally walked away, not because I was broken, but because I finally understood. Sometimes, leaving is not the end of love. It's the beginning of self-respect. The crowd stood when I finished. Not because I was perfect, not because I had conquered some mountain no one else could climb. But, momentarily, they saw a version of themselves reflected in that story of version that had once kept quiet, once settled, once waited for validation, and maybe needed permission to stop. I walked off the stage to handshakes, offers, and gratitude. But most of all, I walked away, knowing I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to Evelyn, not to Eliza, not even to myself. Because I had already won, quietly, completely. And this time, there wasn't a seat at someone else's table waiting for me. There was a table I had built, with my name on the plaque. And it was full. I used to think that proving myself meant staying silent. If I worked harder, tolerated more, and bit my tongue long enough, people would eventually see my worth. I thought love meant compromise even when it came at the cost of my dignity. But the truth? Silence doesn't earn you respect. It just makes it easier to ignore. Walking away wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of remembrance, remembering who I was before I shrank myself to fit into someone else's mold. It's easy to believe that value comes from legacy, last names, and the circles you're allowed into. But real value? It's created in the quiet work no one sees, in the nights you show up for yourself when no one else does. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Never let someone convince you that your worth is negotiable. Your silence makes things smoother. Playing small makes you lovable. You don't need a family's approval to have a future. You don't need a title to take up space. And you sure as hell don't need permission to leave something that breaks you. Build your table. Name your worth. And when the world finally turns around and recognizes you, don't smile because they see it. Smile because you always knew it was there.